Hello, Miss Nora Twomey. Thank you for taking your time and talk, and thank you for the amazing film. We all enjoyed watching it.
Thank you.
So it's this very powerful story about a young girl named Parvana, and the film touches a lot of themes like the importance of storytelling, family, women's rights, courage, war, and human relationships in general. And the film takes place in a specific environment, but we think all of these themes are actually universal. Which of these themes touched you the most?
That's an interesting question, and good evening, everybody, first off. And thanks for coming out to watch the film. I think, I guess I have to bring it back to Deborah Ellis's book, her novel, The Breadwinner, which was first published in the year 2000. And for me, it's character is the most important thing as a filmmaker, to find a character that you can follow through anything. And I think that's what the character of Parvana had. And for me, it's first and foremost a film. It's not a cause, it's not a message, though things are contained, of course, but they're different from person to person, from audience member to audience member as well. So the one thing that you can hang on to as a filmmaker is to find a character that you can love and trust. And I knew that I could do that with Parvana, the way that Deborah had written her. Certainly, sorry, I don't know if I have to stop every now and again for translation.
It's okay.
Okay. Certainly, looking at a very strong female character was something that I always wanted to do, to find a character like Parvana who doesn't fit any kind of convention, whose story is unusual and one that hasn't been put up there for Western audiences, especially, I think, is something that I really wanted to explore. The idea of children in conflict, and to make a film that had empathy at its heart, I think, was something that I wanted to do.
The film is an adaptation of the novel. How hard was it to transform the book into a movie script, and how much does the story differ from the book?
Yeah, I mean, in ways it differs quite a bit, I suppose, in terms of what exactly happens. The characters are quite similar. We changed things, like we changed some of the characters' names because in the book they were quite obviously Sunni names and Shiite names, and we wanted to make sure that it wasn't something that was about religion in a way, or two different the two different strands of Islam. We wanted to make sure that it was again something that centered very much on family. Any place where the book looked outward towards Western culture, we pushed back in to Afghan people, looking at, to Rumi, to looking at their own history, and finding, that rather than anything that looked out towards the West. And why we did that, I think, was because of everything that had happened in the time period between Deborah Ellis publishing that book in 2000 and everything that had happened since. So 9/11, the fall of the Taliban, NATO coming into Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, all of these things were things that I was mindful of as a filmmaker, but also the conversations from which the script was formed. So Anita Doran, initially, our screenwriter, began conversations with people like Amanullah Mojadidi, who's an American-Afghan artist who's spent over a decade in Afghanistan. All of the people from the women's, the Afghan Women's Organization. All of these conversations helped form the screenplay and then helped form our first rough storyboards. We would always back and forth with as many people as we could who had been there, who understood what it was like to be in a situation like Parvana's family find themselves in. So it was quite organic, and in ways Deborah Ellis really trusted us with the story. She had written the first draft of the screenplay, and from there it went on to several more drafts with Anita, And then as we storyboarded, that went through more drafts, and we were just refining all the way through, but based on conversations, especially with Afghan people, to try and make the film work in as many layers as we could make it.
Okay, thank you. So, in the film, we watch two parallel worlds. One is Parvana's reality, and the other is a story, legend, or even a myth about a young hero, Parvana's brother. These two worlds differ in style of animation. Could you please tell us more? How did you develop these two worlds, these two animation styles?
Yeah, I guess even from reading the novel, I knew that we couldn't just have Parvana's exterior world. I thought it would be too emotionally difficult. I felt for audiences to follow Parvana all the way through. It would be. I was aware that you might disconnect from the character and just go into your head and forget about your heart after a while. I've certainly myself experienced situations watching films where at some point it becomes too much, and I protect myself, so it becomes an intellectual experience rather than an emotional one. And I always wanted this to be primarily an emotional experience, again, just at Parvana's level, to experience the world through her eyes, or to feel that you were with her, like Shauzi is with her. So with that, I knew that we had to go into Parvana's imagination to do a number of things to connect Parvana with her father all the way through the story, to connect her with what had happened to her brother, so that we understood not just the conflict that Parvana was going through at that moment, but that there had been previous wars that her family had experienced. So it was, in ways, it was an escape. You know, there's places that people can't touch. You know, they can't touch your imagination. They can't touch the connection that you have even with people that you have lost. You know, your memories. Things like that. I was aware that the Taliban we have those famous images of where these incredible Buddha statues were destroyed in the Bamiyan province back in the late 90s. So I was aware that nobody can take those things from people, you know, and that these things belong to the Afghan people. So for those reasons, that's why we made a story world to give some kind of emotional balance to the film, so that people weren't emotionally distressed for too long. It was an escape, literally, you know.
Are there any questions from the audience? If you want to ask something, just go ahead.
Hi, hello. First of all, I really want to say that I loved the film and I thought it was just so beautiful, so thank you for making it. I want to ask you if you think that right now it's important to have strong female protagonists in films, and is that something you thought about while making this movie? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been important to have strong female protagonists I have two boys. My two children are male, but I want them to see strong female protagonists. I love that they have, you know, the recent Star Wars, heroine on their wall. It's always been important. It continues to be. It's a funny thing, and it's conflicting. I think we're, in ways, there's a contradiction happening these days. We tend to want to define ourselves quite specifically, you know, and if you look through any list of credits, you start figuring out, you know, how many are male, how many are female. Certainly as a filmmaker, I do, and certainly as I look out at our teams, and with a film like The Breadwinner, there was over 300 people making this film, you know, and I'm quite aware, in one hand, that I'm making choices based on gender, which is odd, you know, because in order to have, you know, a balance. So it's an interesting one. I wake up in the morning and I don't see myself as female. I just see myself as Nora. I don't feel that I had this opportunity to make a film because, say, for instance, the Irish Film Board, the film board in my country, makes a special effort to support female filmmakers, because there is such such an imbalance in the film industry in general. and we do need to support women. I'm much more vocal than I would have been in previous years because I'm aware that I can influence the generation of filmmakers that come after me, the ones that are in college now. I can support women in my team, when they go through different phases in their life, and make sure that they can enter back into the workforce when and if they need to. And it's not just for women; it makes a better environment for the men on our teams as well. It means that they can, if they want to, spend time with their families, they can. If they want to bring their children in when their children, are sick from school or whatever, kind of thing, that they can do that. So it makes a better environment for everybody. But in the meantime, we have to go through, I think, this strange period where we become even more defined, I think, than before. Our boxes become more defined than they would have previously been. But so yeah, it's an interesting time. But absolutely, I feel that it's necessary to see female protagonists like Parvana in film. Yeah.
Any more questions from the audience?
I'm very admired of your cartoons and the cartoons of Tom Moore and Studio Cartoon Saloon. And I want to ask you, are there any problems with showing this film in the Afghanistan or Iran or other countries like this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Not so far. I mean, again, the film is going to be shown on TV. It's going to be broadcast on TV in Afghanistan later on this year. There are a few cinemas there, and of those cinemas, there's only one where women will go. So the TV is a better medium for showing a film like this. I'm sure there will be. So far, it's been really well received. We showed the film in Washington, D.C. to the First Lady of Afghanistan, Rula Ghani, and many Afghan dignitaries. It's been, so far it's gotten really good feedback. But again, there is such a huge sense of ownership. Like half, our cast are Afghan or, of Afghan descent. So all the way through the process, we had Afghan people involved. So to me, it's no surprise that other, Afghan audiences now are picking up on things that Afghan people who contributed to the film put in there, So so far it hasn't had any really strong negative reaction. Sometimes it has from people who haven't seen the film yet and who, imagine what the ignorance. That might form part of it. The interesting thing about animation is it takes so long that by the time you finish making it, you can be pretty sure that people have seen it at so many stages that all of the or as many of the mistakes, most of the mistakes can be ironed out of it. But I'm sure there will be, as with any film, some people will like it, some people won't. That's just filmmaking.
Any more questions? Yes.
Hi, I have a question. Were you at all nervous or anxious about making a film about a culture that's not your home culture? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, that's why we had so many Afghan people involved in making this film. Was particularly, for that reason. I'm also aware, though, that making a film like The Breadwinner, it's not something that gets made every year, because it doesn't make any commercial sense. A film like The Breadwinner is never going to be a big box office success or anything like that. As a film, its place is in schools. Its place is as a conversation starter. So again, it's such a collaborative medium that I think, and not just Afghan people or Irish people or people from Luxembourg or Canada or any of the places, India, Pakistan, Iraq, the places that people came from, or that to make this film. It's not just an Afghan story. It's a story of a child in conflict. It's a universal story. I find things that I have in common with Parvana as much as somebody from another country. For me, culture is all about collaboration. I think that once we start saying that only certain people can tell certain stories, that it's the death of culture in ways. I know it's something that's particularly current at the moment, but I think collaboration is amazing, and amazing stories come from collaboration. I think that you dig up any artifact in Afghanistan and you see the influence of different cultures, and that was something that struck me quite a bit when I was researching this film. Yes, of course, it was a huge consideration, but I think that one we were quite mindful of, and because of that, I took less chances or less things for granted than, say, we did on Song of the Sea or Secret of Kells.
Okay, that's all from the audience.
In one of the interviews, we read that in the beginning one of the producers actually considered making a live-action film instead of animation. Could you tell us could you tell us more about it, and why, by your opinion, animation makes the story even more powerful?
Yeah, I think by the time this was Aircraft Pictures who originally had the rights for Deborah Ellis's book. So they had the book for a few years before they came to Cartoon Saloon. So by the time they came to Cartoon Saloon to see if we could collaborate on the film, they had already kind of made the decision to make it in animation, because why else would you come to Cartoon Saloon? We've no experience with live action. So Deborah Ellis's first draft of the film, of the screenplay, was for a live action version of the film. I think they didn't go ahead with it in live action, partly because they wanted to shoot it in Afghanistan, and it became more difficult as in the late 2000s to make a film, because it became a little more dangerous. There is a live action film which addresses the same issue with the girl dressing up as a boy. It's called Osama. It's a really beautiful film set in Afghanistan. So it's not there is a term, bacha posh, which is used for young girls in Afghanistan to dress as boys, because it's something that's quite common, because it's oftentimes the only way that's left for young girls, for a number of reasons. Why young girls will dress as boys in Afghanistan. It's not an unusual thing, but I think that the main reason why they chose to go with animation rather than live action is, again, because of that emotional fatigue that you can have if you watched a live action girl. And indeed, I think for me, this is one of the Osama, that live action film, it's an incredible film. It's a very brave film, very beautiful, with wonderful performances in it. But it's an angry film in ways as well. So with the Breadwinner, I think we wanted to focus more on hope. And again, with animation, I think that you're probably more likely to be able to follow a character further in a more abstract way. I think there's something about expressing a character with a few lines which makes the character very universal. If you're looking at a live action face, it can be more other, it can be more separate from you. I think that we're probably more likely to identify with animated characters than with live action characters, and therefore the character feels more like ourselves.
Okay, so you're part of the team of the studio Cartoon Saloon, and you were all involved in the making of Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea, also two magical animated films. In all three of them, legends and stories play an important role. So where does this fascination with stories come from?
That's an interesting question. I don't know is the answer to that, where the fascination comes from. I guess, I met Tom Moore and Paul Young, my partners in Cartoon Saloon. I met them in university. in Dublin, along with many of the people that I still work with today. We have similar sensibilities, and we have an enthusiasm about storytelling, and about using the beauty of the frame as much as we can to tell stories. I think that there's a very special space if you can attract an audience with the beauty of the screen that you create, or the world that you create, so that even if you're tackling something like with The Secret of Kells, it was the idea of, what you do, how can you be creative? How can you cherish creativity when the world seems like a dark place? With Song of the Sea, it was about grief and how you handle grief, how you hold on to love, when it feels like your heart is breaking. And there are many themes with the Breadwinner, but I guess finding beauty in the frame, but also just beauty in the storytelling. I mean, it's something that we've always been trying to balance and try to understand. But I mean, we're storytellers, and so we love storytelling, and so it always finds its way into the films that we tell. I think we try to tell stories as, the humanity tries to tell stories as in a way to sanitize the world, like to make the world sane, because the world is chaos and the world is crazy, and it becomes crazier every day. But to find hope, we tell ourselves stories, and sometimes they're, gruesome stories. If you look at Homer's Odyssey, for example, I mean, it's a pretty gruesome, story, but it makes us feel less alone, and I think that's what stories do. They help us feel like we are in this together, So and certainly for us, because we managed to find a way to tell stories like The Breadwinner or Song of the Sea or Secret of Kells, in co-production. So we managed to find enough different companies that want to tell the story together. We can put our resources together and tell unusual stories, or ones that push the boundaries a little bit more. I hope that answers it.
Yes. So the last time, does anyone from the audience want to ask a question? Yes.
I noticed that the style of animation, when you're telling the Suleiman's story, is similar to the storytelling in Persepolis, when her uncle tells her the story. Were you inspired by Persepolis, maybe?
Well, certainly, yeah. It was. We looked at Persepolis. We looked at Grave of the Fireflies. We looked at Waltz with Bashir. We looked at a lot of films with more challenging subject matter, I think, when we went into The Breadwinner initially. But in terms of its specifically influencing that style, where the story world style of animation came from was we initially started with the real world and with Parvana, trying to make the most naturalistic type of animation that we could, tried to give a fairly naturalistic character design, make sure that Kabul felt really immersive so that you could almost walk into it. Our camera is always slightly moving. You can feel the dust on the street, because we wanted to show the vulnerability of Parvana's life. So with that then, and staying in the sphere of 2D animation, like two-dimensional animation, we wanted to just have something that would contrast with it. So we started with the real world, and then once we knew how the real world needed to look in order to express Parvana's story the best way we possibly could, we just went with the opposite. So what's the opposite of that? How can we express Parvana's imagination with them? Certainly we chose a very childlike way of animating Suleiman initially, so that even the voice actor, we asked him to really make like a theatre style of performance rather than a very naturalistic style of performance, so that it felt like a child's imagination. So I guess it was probably what links it to Persepolis is the imagination, especially of a child. So I think that probably links the two. But we looked, because it's a digital form of animation, but we had a cutout animator, Jenny Sussel, who came to Cartoon Saloon and did a lot of research with us. Between Reza Riyahi, our character designer, and Jenny's, we kind of went back and forth quite a bit until we came up with the final character design for the story world. But really, it was formed more like a balance between the real world and the story world, rather than looking at specific films to reference.
And the last question from us: which legend or story would you like to animate next?
That's an interesting question. I mean, we have a lot of different projects in development. Our big issue is we have to say no, many times a week to different projects that come in, or because it takes so long to make an animated film. The Breadwinner was quite fast, with about 4 or 5 years, I think. So right now, Tom Moore is working on Wolfwalkers, which is the kind of the third in the a series of Irish mythological films. So that we're writing storyboard at that. We'll be recording voices in about a month's time. So there's that coming up. We also have a film called My Father's Dragon, which began before The Breadwinner, with a writer called Meg LaFave, who wrote on Pixar's Inside Out. So just before I came up here upstairs this evening, I was looking at the script for that. So we have lots of films that are on the go, and I'm sure we can maybe I can come in person the next time when we have a film, and you guys have your festival.
Yeah, that would be great. So thank you once again for all your time and all the wonderful answers. It was a great honor for all of us.
Thank you very much. Okay, have a great evening. Thank you. Goodbye.
Hvala, drago občinstvo, za vaš obisk in pozornost. Vabljeni ste v kavarno Kinodvora na tematsko druženje in na vse prihodne dogodke našega festivala Kinotrip.
Thank you, dear guests, for your attention, and welcome to our cafe for a thematic reception.